The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with panic. Delegates from dozens of worlds filled the massive circular room, their voices rising in fear and anger. At the center of it all, suspended in a shimmering containment field, sat an emperor dragon egg. It was massive, nearly 6 feet tall, with scales that shifted between deep purple and midnight black. Every few seconds, it pulsed with a faint red glow, and each pulse sent ripples of raw psychic energy washing over everyone in the room. Every species in the galaxy knew the stories. Emperor dragons were living nightmares, immortal predators that could live for thousands of years. A fully grown emperor dragon could tear through battleship hulls with its claws and reduce entire fleets to molten slag with its breath. They were intelligent, cunning, and completely untamable. And now, somehow, an egg had been found on a dying colony world, abandoned and alone. The problem was simple but terrifying. The egg was going to hatch soon. Maybe in days, maybe in hours. And when it did, that hatchling would be confused, angry, and unbelievably dangerous. Someone had to be there when it hatched. Someone had to try to keep it calm, to prevent it from destroying the entire space station in its first moments of life. But who could possibly do that? Commander Vree of the Korthan warriors stood tall, his 4 arms crossed over his chest. The Korthans were known across the galaxy as the fiercest fighters, beings who had never retreated from any battle. But even Vree was shaking his head. "My people won't go near it," he said, his deep voice heavy with regret. "We sent our best warrior psychics to examine the egg yesterday. They lasted less than 5 minutes. The psychic pressure radiating from that thing nearly crushed their minds. One of them is still in medical care, screaming about fire and rage." Across from him, the Valari representative hovered in her zero-gravity sphere. The Valari were pure telepaths, beings of thought and emotion who rarely spoke aloud. But now her mental voice trembled as it echoed in everyone's minds. "We cannot help you. I can feel it from here, even through the containment field. The rage inside that egg burns like a star. Whatever is inside is already dreaming of violence. If we get any closer, it will tear our minds apart." The debates had been going on for 3 days now. Every major species had been asked. The brilliant archons who could calculate 1,000 possibilities in seconds, had run the numbers and declared it a suicide mission. The heavily armored Titanborn who could survive in the heart of a volcano, had refused after their scales began to crack just from standing near the egg. Even the machines, the cold and logical artificial beings who feared nothing, had reported massive system failures when they attempted to approach. Ambassador Lydia Hayes of Earth sat in the human section, quiet and thoughtful. She was a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and gray hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Humans were the newest members of the Galactic Council, barely 50 years into their membership. Most species still saw them as primitive, reckless, and dangerously unpredictable. But Lydia had been watching and listening for 3 days, and she'd come to a decision. Finally she stood up. "I'll send someone from our colony ship." The room fell silent. Every head, tentacle, and optical sensor turned toward her. Commander Vree stared at her in disbelief. Who would be foolish enough to volunteer for this? Lydia met his gaze calmly. "A boy named Tommy Blake. He's 12 years old. He grew up on Earth caring for dangerous animals before his family joined the colony program." The room erupted. A child? A human child? Several delegates began shouting at once. This was madness. This was irresponsible. This was going to get an innocent boy killed. But Lydia raised her hand for silence. "Tommy volunteered when I explained the situation to our colony. He's worked with abused dogs that would attack anyone who came near them. He's helped rehabilitate wild horses that had never been touched by humans. He has a gift for understanding frightened, aggressive creatures. And he wants to try." A gift? Vria's voice was almost gentle now, filled with pity. "Ambassador Hayes, this is not some animal from your world. This is an emperor dragon. It will kill him in seconds." Lydia smiled sadly. "Maybe. But maybe not. Because here's what I've learned about humans in my 60 years of life. We don't see monsters the way you do. When every other species looks at that egg and sees a threat, a weapon, a nightmare waiting to happen, we see something else. We see a baby that's about to be born alone and afraid, with no parent, no family, and no one who cares if it lives or dies. And that breaks our hearts." The council members looked at each other in confusion. The Valari representative's voice whispered through their minds. "Humans are either the bravest species in the galaxy or the most insane." Lydia shrugged. "Probably a little bit of both." 3 days later, Tommy Blake arrived at the space station aboard a small shuttle. He was a skinny kid with messy brown hair, wearing a simple gray jumpsuit and carrying a backpack filled with tools and supplies. He looked around the docking bay with wide eyes, taking in the alien architecture and the dozens of strange beings moving past him. The egg was waiting in the containment chamber. And according to the sensors, it was already beginning to crack. Tommy took a deep breath and walked toward his destiny. Within the hour, everything would change. The Emperor Dragon burst from its shell in an explosion of fire and fury. The egg cracked open like a bomb going off, sending shards of crystalline shell flying in every direction. Some pieces embedded themselves in the reinforced walls, others melted into slag from the sheer heat. And from the center of that destruction emerged the hatchling. It was small, no bigger than a large dog, but it moved with terrifying speed and power. Its scales were pure obsidian black, gleaming like polished stone, and its eyes burned with an orange fire that seemed to come from somewhere deep and ancient. The moment it took its first breath, it unleashed a roar that shouldn't have been possible from something so small. The sound was deafening. The observation windows cracked and then shattered completely, raining glass down on the terrified observers. Scientists and security personnel dove for cover as the roar seemed to vibrate through their very bones. It wasn't just noise. It was rage given voice, pure and undiluted. Then came the fire. The hatchling opened its jaws and flames poured out like liquid death. The reinforced walls, designed to withstand plasma weapons and asteroid impacts, began to melt. Metal dripped like candle wax. The temperature in the observation area spiked so fast that alarms began screaming throughout the station. Security Chief Derek Walsh was the first to respond. He was a veteran of 3 wars, a man who'd faced down pirates and hostile aliens without flinching. He slammed his hand on the control panel and activated the stun fields. Invisible waves of electromagnetic energy flooded the containment chamber, enough power to knock out a Korthan warrior or shut down a rogue combat mech. The dragon turned toward the source of the energy and roared again. Then something impossible happened. The hatchling absorbed the energy. Its scales began to glow brighter, and it grew larger, visibly expanding as it fed on the stun field's power. Derek cut the field immediately, sweat pouring down his face. "That's not possible," he whispered. "Nothing can feed on stun energy." Commander Vree was already moving. "My warriors will handle this." He barked orders in his native language, and 3 of his best soldiers charged into the chamber. The Korthans were massive beings, each one standing nearly 8 feet tall with 4 arms and natural armor plating. They'd been bred for war across 1,000 generations. The first Korthan warrior lasted exactly 4 seconds. The hatchling moved like lightning, its small body coiling and then striking like a snake. It slammed into the warrior's chest with enough force to send him flying backward into the wall. The impact left a crater in the reinforced metal. The warrior slid to the ground, unconscious. The second warrior tried to grab the dragon from behind. The hatchling spun and raked its claws across the warrior's armor. The claws, no longer than human fingers, carved through Korthan battle armor like it was paper. The warrior screamed and stumbled back, clutching his ruined chest plate. The third warrior was smart enough to run. He made it out of the chamber just before the hatchling could catch him, and Derek slammed his fist on the door controls. "Seal the chamber," Derek shouted. "Nothing gets in or out. Full lockdown protocol." Heavy blast doors slammed down with a boom that echoed through the entire level. Emergency lights began flashing red. The station's AI announced in a calm voice that containment procedures were in effect and all personnel should evacuate to safe zones. Inside the sealed chamber, the hatchling continued its rampage. It clawed at the walls, breathed fire at the ceiling, and screamed its rage at a universe that had abandoned it. Dr. Beth Wilson was in the lab, her eyes fixed on the brain scan displays. She was a neuroscientist who'd studied hundreds of alien species, and what she was seeing made her heart ache. "It's not attacking randomly," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Look at the brain scans. Look at the neural patterns." Vree stormed over, his 4 arms trembling with anger. "What are you talking about? It nearly killed my warriors." Beth pointed at the screen. "Yes, but look at these readings. These are fear responses. Terror actually. Its amygdala is firing like crazy. The aggression centers are secondary. It's attacking because it's absolutely terrified." "Terrified?" Vree growled. "That thing is a predator. It fears nothing." "It's a baby," Beth said quietly. "A newborn baby that woke up alone in a room full of strangers. Every species here probably smells wrong to it, looks wrong, sounds wrong. Imagine being born and the first thing you experience is total alien confusion." Tommy Blake had been standing at the broken observation window watching everything. He'd been quiet this whole time, just observing. And what he saw wasn't a monster. He'd seen this exact behavior before back on Earth. There'd been a dog at the shelter where he volunteered. A big German shepherd that had been abused for years. When anyone approached, it would snarl and snap and throw itself against the cage bars. Everyone said it was vicious, that it needed to be put down. But Tommy had sat outside that cage for hours just watching. And eventually he realized the truth. The dog wasn't mean. It was scared to death. Then there were the horses at his grandfather's ranch. Wild Mustangs that had been captured and were about to be sold. They kicked and bit anyone who came near. But Tommy's grandfather had taught him to see past the violence. "A scared animal acts mean," he'd said. "They're just trying to protect themselves the only way they know how." Tommy looked at the hatchling now, at the way it kept turning in circles, at how it flinched at every sound, at how its attacks were defensive rather than predatory. This wasn't a monster. This was a scared baby, surrounded by strangers in a strange place, with no parent to comfort it and no way to understand what was happening. "I'm going in," Tommy said quietly. Ambassador Hayes grabbed his arm immediately. "Absolutely not, Tommy. You saw what just happened. It will kill you." Tommy looked up at her with those calm, determined eyes. "Miss Hayes, look at it. Really look at it. It's alone. It just hatched and there's nobody there who cares about it. It just needs someone who isn't afraid." "Tommy," she started. But he was already moving. His fingers flew over the door panel, entering the override code that Lydia had given him for emergencies. The blast door began to open. Derek shouted from across the room. "Stop that kid." But it was too late. Tommy Blake stepped into the containment chamber, and the door sealed shut behind him. The containment chamber fell silent as Tommy stepped inside. For a moment nothing moved. The air was thick with smoke and heat, and the floor was covered in melted metal and shattered egg fragments. The walls still glowed red from the dragon's fire. It was like stepping into a furnace. The dragon turned slowly to face him. Its eyes locked onto Tommy, and in that moment, the boy felt the full weight of something ancient and terrifying staring into his soul. Those eyes burned with an orange fire that seemed to reach back through countless generations of predators. This was a creature born knowing how to kill, born with instincts older than most civilizations. The hatchling roared. It was a sound that made every species watching cover their ears in agony. The observation deck's remaining equipment sparked and died. Several aliens collapsed, their sensitive hearing organs damaged. Even through the reinforced walls, the sound was like a physical force, a wave of pure rage and power that declared war on everything around it. Tommy didn't run. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he did something that made absolutely no sense to anyone watching. He sat down, right there on the scorched floor, crossing his legs like he was about to have a picnic. Pieces of hot metal were still cooling around him. The air was so hot it hurt to breathe. But Tommy just sat there, calm as could be. Then he started humming. It was an old song, a lullaby his mom used to sing when he was little and couldn't sleep. He couldn't remember all the words anymore, but he remembered the melody. Soft and gentle, rising and falling like waves on a beach. His voice was quiet, almost lost in the residual crackle of cooling metal and sparking equipment. The hatchling tilted its head, confused. This wasn't how prey was supposed to act. Every instinct it had, every bit of genetic memory passed down through its bloodline, told it that creatures ran when it roared. They fought or they fled. They didn't just sit down and make soft sounds. The dragon charged. It moved with terrifying speed, claws tearing gouges in the metal floor, wings spread wide even though it couldn't fly yet. Its jaws opened, revealing rows of crystalline teeth that could tear through starship hulls. In the observation deck, several people screamed. Ambassador Hayes lurched forward, pressing against the glass, her face white with terror. Tommy extended his hand, palm up. Not defensive, not trying to ward off an attack. Just offering. The dragon stopped inches from his face. So close that Tommy could feel its breath washing over him, hot enough to make his skin prickle. So close that he could see his own reflection in those burning orange eyes. The hatchling's jaws were still open, still ready to bite down, to end this strange little creature that refused to behave properly. No creature in the history of the galaxy had ever stood still before an emperor dragon. Not like this. Not willingly. Every instinct screamed at the hatchling to attack, to prove its dominance, to eliminate this potential threat. But something stopped it. Maybe it was confusion. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe, buried beneath all that rage and fear, was a tiny spark of something else. Tommy slowly, carefully moved his hand closer. His fingers were trembling slightly, but his voice stayed steady. "Hey there," he whispered, still humming between words. "You're okay. I know you're scared. I'd be scared too. He touched the dragon's snout. Just the lightest touch, his fingertips barely making contact with those obsidian scales. They were warm, almost hot, and smoother than he'd expected. He could feel the dragon's muscles tensing beneath, could sense the raw power coiled and ready to strike. It's okay to be scared, Tommy continued softly. You just got here. Everything's strange and loud and wrong, isn't it? And there's no one here you know. No one who feels like family. The hatchling's eyes widened. The fury in them flickered, like a candle flame in the wind. For just a second, Tommy saw past the rage to what was underneath. Baby. A confused, terrified baby that had woken up alone. Then something broke. The rage crumbled like a dam giving way. The dragon's legs buckled and it collapsed onto the floor, exhausted. All that fury had been burning through its energy like wildfire, and now there was nothing left. It curled its body around Tommy, its tail wrapping loosely around the boy's waist, its head resting against his chest. Tommy smiled. Gently, carefully, he reached up and scratched behind the dragon's horns, right where two small ridges met. The hatchling made a sound, soft and questioning, nothing like the terrifying roar from before. It sounded almost like a purr. In the observation deck there was dead silence. No one moved. No one even seemed to be breathing. Dr. Beth Wilson's scanner slipped from her numb fingers and clattered to the floor. She stared through the window, her mouth hanging open. That's impossible, she whispered. Emperor dragons don't bond. They're solitary apex predators. They don't form attachments. They don't trust. They can't. But the evidence was right there in front of her. A creature that should have killed the boy instantly was now curled around him like a protective pet. The most dangerous predator in known space was making soft, contented sounds as a 12-year-old human scratched its head. Commander Vree stood frozen, all four of his arms hanging limp at his sides. His warrior pride, built over decades of battle and victory, had just been shaken to its core. The human child did what no species has ever done, he said, his voice barely audible. He walked up to an emperor dragon hatchling and made it trust him. Ambassador Lydia Hayes pressed her hand against the glass, tears streaming down her face. She was smiling though, a huge smile that made her look 20 years younger. That's Tommy, she said proudly. That's what humans do. We see past the monster to the person underneath. We care when others won't. That's humanity. Inside the chamber, Tommy kept humming his mother's lullaby. The dragon's breathing slowed and deepened. Within minutes, the hatchling that had nearly destroyed an entire section of the space station was fast asleep, peaceful and calm, wrapped around a human boy who'd refused to be afraid. The galaxy would never be the same. 3 weeks passed, and life on the space station had transformed into something no one could have predicted. Tommy had named the hatchling Ember, after the way her scales glowed when she was happy. And in those 3 weeks, scientists from across the galaxy had descended on the station like moths to a flame, all desperate to understand what they were witnessing. Emperor dragons were supposed to be solitary apex predators. Every historical record, every ancient text, every piece of data collected over thousands of years said the same thing. They bonded with no one. They trusted no one. They lived alone, hunted alone, and died alone. It was simply their nature, as unchangeable as the laws of physics. Yet Ember followed Tommy everywhere. When he woke up in the morning in his assigned quarters, she was curled around his bed like a protective guardian. When he went to the cafeteria for breakfast, she walked beside him, her tail swishing contentedly. When he had lessons with his teacher from the colony ship, Ember would lie at his feet, occasionally snoring softly. It was like watching a loyal dog with its owner, except the dog was a creature that could theoretically destroy planets when fully grown. Dr. Ryan Carter from Earth's xenobiology team had given up trying to make sense of it through conventional science. He stood in the secure courtyard now, tablet in hand, taking notes as he watched Tommy and Ember play. The courtyard had been specially reinforced after Ember accidentally melted through a wall during her second week, but now it served as their personal playground. Tommy threw a metal sphere across the yard. "Fetch, girl." Ember bounded after it with pure joy, her growing wings flapping awkwardly at her sides. She couldn't fly yet, but she was getting bigger every day. Already she was the size of a small horse, though she still moved with puppy-like clumsiness. She caught the sphere in her jaws, careful not to melt it with her fire, and came trotting back proudly. She dropped it at Tommy's feet and made a chirping sound, looking up at him expectantly. "Good girl?" Tommy laughed and scratched under her chin, right in the spot that made her back leg kick reflexively. "You're getting so much better at this." Dr. Carter shook his head in amazement. "She's completely docile with him. Playful even." But yesterday a Corthan guard got within 10 feet of Tommy, and she nearly incinerated the poor guy. We had to evacuate the entire corridor. Dr. Beth Wilson stood beside him, her own tablet displaying brain scans and behavioral patterns. It's protective behavior, she said thoughtfully. Like a mother bear with her cub. The bond is incredibly strong. But here's what doesn't make sense. Tommy isn't her mother. He's not even the same species. He's not even biologically similar. Emperor dragons are reptilian in nature. Humans are mammals. There's no logical reason for this level of attachment. Maybe logic isn't the right framework, Dr. Carter suggested, watching as Ember rolled onto her back so Tommy could scratch her belly. Maybe we're trying to understand something that exists outside our usual parameters. Up on the observation platform, members of the Galactic Council watched in fascination. This had become a daily ritual for many of them. They would come and watch the human boy play with the dragon, trying to understand the impossible. A Valari representative floated nearby, its mental voice thoughtful. How does the human child accomplish this? We have studied emperor dragons for millennia. We know their biology, their psychology, their evolutionary history. Nothing we know explains this bond. Ambassador Lydia Hayes stood with her hands clasped behind her back, a small smile on her face. Because Tommy doesn't see an emperor dragon when he looks at her. He sees Ember. Not a species, not a classification, not a walking weapons system. He sees a living being who needed kindness and he gave it to her. Diane Foster, Tommy's teacher from the colony ship, nodded in agreement. She was a woman in her 50s who'd been teaching human children for 3 decades. We try to teach our children something that I think the galaxy has forgotten, she said quietly. Every creature, no matter how dangerous or strange, is an individual. Not a category. Not a threat assessment. Not a collection of data points. A person with thoughts and feelings. But it's an animal, Commander Vree objected, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. The past 3 weeks had shaken many of his assumptions about the universe. Diane smiled. Is she? Ember is intelligent. She understands commands. She responds to her name. She shows affection, curiosity, fear, joy. She mourns when Tommy leaves and celebrates when he returns. She makes choices. At what point does intelligence make something more than just an animal? Down in the courtyard, Tommy had pulled out his tablet and settled against the wall. Ember immediately curled her growing body around him, her head resting on his lap, her tail forming a protective circle. She made a deep, rumbling sound of contentment as Tommy absently scratched behind her horns while reading. It was a scene of perfect peace. The most dangerous predator in the galaxy, sleeping peacefully like a house cat in a sunbeam. Dr. Wilson recorded everything, knowing that this footage would be studied for generations. We're witnessing something unprecedented, she murmured. A cross-species bond that shouldn't exist. The question is, why Tommy? Why humans? What do we have that allows us to connect with a creature that every other species fears? Dr. Carter looked at his colleague. Maybe it's not about what we have. Maybe it's about what we don't have. What do you mean? Look at how other species approached Ember. The Corthans saw a threat to be dominated. The Valari sensed rage to be avoided. The Archons calculated risk probabilities. Everyone saw her through the lens of fear or utility or analysis. But Tommy? He gestured at the boy reading peacefully with a dragon curled around him. Tommy just saw someone who needed a friend. The galaxy watched and wondered. Research papers were being written. Theories were being proposed and debunked. Entire scientific careers were being built around studying Tommy and Ember. But Tommy didn't care about any of that. He just knew that Ember needed him and he needed her. Sometimes the most profound truths are the simplest ones. And as the afternoon light filtered through the courtyard's reinforced dome, boy and dragon rested together, content in a bond that defied all logic but made perfect emotional sense. The universe was learning something important. Sometimes the heart understands what the mind cannot explain. The attack came without warning. It was 3 a.m, station time, when the first explosion tore through the outer hull. Alarms screamed to life, red emergency lights flooded the corridors, and people stumbled from their quarters in confusion and terror. The Ragnar Syndicate had come for Ember. They were a criminal organization that operated in the lawless regions between galactic territories, dealing in weapons, slaves, and exotic creatures. An emperor dragon was worth more than entire star systems to the right buyer. There were warlords who would pay fortunes for a dragon they could control. Scientists who would pay even more to study one. And there were darker purposes too, ones that nobody wanted to think about. They'd been planning this for weeks, watching the station, studying the security patterns, waiting for the perfect moment. Now 50 armed mercenaries poured through the breach in the hull, their weapons cutting down anyone who stood in their way. Security Chief Derek Walsh rallied his forces immediately. He was a good leader, brave and tactical, but his team was designed to handle station disputes and the occasional smuggler. They weren't prepared for a full military assault. Energy blasts filled the corridors. His people fought back bravely, but they were outgunned and outnumbered. Ambassador Lydia Hayes was in the command center when the attack began. She saw the tactical displays showing mercenaries advancing toward the residential section where Tommy and Ember were sleeping. Her blood ran cold. "Get the boy to safety," she shouted into the comm system. "Priority 1, protect Tommy Blake." But chaos is hard to control. In the smoke and confusion, with people running in every direction and explosions shaking the station's foundation, Tommy and Ember got separated. Tommy had been rushing toward the secure shelter when a blast wall came down between them. Ember was on one side, Tommy on the other, and suddenly they couldn't see each other. The mercenaries knew exactly what they were doing. They'd brought specialized equipment, including a quantum cage designed specifically for containing high-energy beings. 6 of them surrounded Ember while she was distracted, searching frantically for Tommy. They activated the cage and it materialized around her in a shimmer of blue light. Ember roared, a sound of pure fury that shook the entire station. She threw herself against the energy barriers, but quantum cages were designed to hold creatures far more powerful than a young dragon. The more she struggled, the stronger the cage became, feeding off her own energy. Her roars echoed through every corridor, a sound of rage and fear that made everyone who heard it feel sick inside. Tommy ran through smoke-filled corridors, coughing and calling for Ember. He could hear her roaring in the distance, could feel through their bond that she was terrified. He had to get to her. Nothing else mattered. A mercenary stepped out of the smoke and grabbed him. The man was huge, wearing full combat armor, and he lifted Tommy off the ground with one hand. Tommy struggled, kicking and fighting, but he was just a 12-year-old boy. "Leave the kid," another mercenary called out. "Just get the dragon to the transport ship." The mercenary threw Tommy against the wall. Pain exploded through the boy's shoulder as he hit hard and crumpled to the floor. The world spun. He tried to get up, but his legs wouldn't work right. Through blurry vision, he watched the mercenaries heading toward where Ember was caged. And Ember felt it. Through the bond they shared, she felt Tommy's fear. Felt his pain. Felt him calling for her. Something primal ignited deep in her chest. Something that went beyond instinct or training. It was love mixed with protective fury, and it was more powerful than any quantum cage ever built. The cage exploded. Not just broke or deactivated, it exploded in a blast of energy that sent the mercenaries flying backward. Ember emerged from the destruction like a force of nature, her scales glowing white-hot, her eyes blazing with purpose. What happened next became legendary footage, studied by military tacticians and xenobiologists for years to come. Ember tore through the station, but she didn't destroy randomly. She moved with surgical precision, somehow knowing exactly where the mercenaries were and avoiding every civilian area. She tracked them through smoke and darkness, her senses locked onto their heat signatures and the scent of their fear. When mercenaries fired at her, she dodged or absorbed the blasts. When they tried to run, she cut off their escape routes. Her flames melted their weapons but left the station's critical systems untouched. She was fighting with intelligence and restraint, not blind rage. It was like watching a master warrior at work, except this warrior was barely a month old. She found Tommy lying injured in a corridor. The moment she saw him, all the rage vanished instantly. She made a soft, worried sound and carefully approached, her massive claws clicking on the metal floor. Tommy looked up at her with tears in his eyes. "Ember," he whispered. "You came." She gently lifted him with her claws, cradling him like he was made of glass. Tommy was the most precious thing in her world, and she carried him with infinite care through the damaged station toward the medical bay. People scattered out of her way, terrified, but she paid them no attention. She had one purpose: get Tommy to safety. She set him down carefully outside the medical bay and stood guard at the door, her body blocking the entrance. When Dr. Ryan Carter approached, she growled, a deep rumbling warning. But when he held up his hands and said, "I'm here to help Tommy," she studied him for a moment, then stepped aside just enough to let him pass. The mercenaries who survived the assault were arrested. Station security had rounded them up while Ember was searching for Tommy. The footage of Ember's rampage was transmitted across the galaxy within hours. In the council chambers days later, Commander Vree stood watching the recordings with something like awe on his face. The dragon showed mercy, judgment, protection. She distinguished between threats and innocence. Emperor dragons don't do this. They're supposed to be mindless killing machines. Ambassador Lydia Hayes stood beside him, watching Tommy sleeping in the medical bay with Ember curled protectively around his bed. Ember does. Because a 12-year-old boy showed her something no one else thought to show her. What's that? Vree asked quietly. That even the fiercest predator can learn love. That violence doesn't have to be the only answer. That family means protecting those who matter, not destroying everything in your path. Tommy recovered within days. His shoulder healed, the bruises faded, but something had changed. The bond between him and Ember was even stronger now. They'd saved each other, protected each other, and proven that their connection was real. The Galactic Council passed a resolution. From now on, humans would be assigned to all cases involving dangerous or misunderstood species. Because humans had a gift that no other species possessed. They dared to care when others dared not even approach. They saw individuals instead of threats. They offered kindness instead of fear. And sometimes, that made all the difference in the universe.